Hi, this is Steve Rigolosi, and today on Forgotten Mysteries, I have for you Folio on Florence White by Will Oursler. This is copyright 1947 by an English publisher, Egg&E Arts and Entertainment, which was based on Bloomsbury Street in London, that great literary street. So because this is a UK edition, I'm pretty sure that the original edition, the American edition, was published at least a couple of years earlier, which would make sense because the book is taking place just as World War II, not as it's breaking out, but as the United States has just entered World War II after Pearl Harbor. And just a little something interesting there. I think that Florence White there on the cover bears a distinct resemblance to Lucille Ball. So Will Oursler's books are rather hard to find. I see them almost nowhere. This one I bought at a fabulous used bookstore that I came across in Freeport, Maine, where I said to the owner, I think we're the same person, because his mystery section, I could have mortgaged my house and spent all my money on the books that he had in his mystery section. What a selection. And this is where I found that, the book. And it was really quite a find because I had read another Oursler, this one right here, The Trial of Vincent Ross, a couple of years ago, and always had my eye out for other books by him because I liked that book. So finding Folio on Florence White was a find that made me happy, and it got me another Will Oursler book to read and to make a video on to introduce you guys to Mr. Oursler. So I don't have a lot of biographical details on Will Oursler, except that he was rather a prolific writer. He published not only fiction, but also plenty of nonfiction. He appeared to be a man of faith. He did several books about faith and what that means. He wrote sort of general nonfiction. He wrote a history of Father Flanagan in Boys Town and other sort of popular topics. And so I have the sense that he was probably pretty successful in his day. And I looked up reviews, contemporary reviews from when the books were published, and the critics seemed to like him, and I can see why. One thing interesting about this book is it kind of put me in mind of the way Americans now think about, or have been trained to think about, Scandinavian noirs or Scandinavian suspense, right? There's that whole genre out there, Stig Larsson and many others, Karen Fossum, Arnold Orendridason, Leif Persson, my favorite, Lars Kepler. This Nordic noir comes to our shores. Joe Nesbo comes to our shores pretty regularly, and I think we have certain expectations for what it is. And reading the inside front flap of this book, it was fun to see how the English perceived American books of that era. I just want to read you this bit from the flap. This is an American detective story with New York for its setting. It is an interesting presentation of a first-rate story. The pace is fast and the plot thick. The lawyer detectives have the humor, slickness, and speed of thought and action we have come to expect of American lawyer investigators. But this book will appeal to all who like a good detective story, honestly told, and told in a most original way. So, high praise indeed from the English. I thought it odd that they would describe the plot as thick, which to me has connotations of gloppiness or getting mired in detail. And I don't really think that that's a fair description of this book, but maybe the British meant it in a different way. back in the 40s. So let me tell you what I like about Will Oursler and his mysteries. The first is that he does interesting things with his narratives. They aren't strict first person or third person, or just what you kind of would expect from a general novel. In the Trial of Vincent Dune, this one here, the whole book is basically composed of court documents and testimony in the courtroom, lots of Q&A. And it was really interesting to see how Oursler made that work, made that format work. So not an epistolary novel, but something, kind of along those lines, something different under the sun. And he uses a different, I don't want to say gimmick, because that sounds cheesy. He uses a different technique in FOLIO on Florence White, where each chapter, starts with a piece of paper, an excerpt from the law firm file kept on one of its clients, Florence White. And these documents are kind of the starting off point for what happens in that chapter. And then interspersed throughout, I don't know if you'll be able to see this, but you can see you see how some of it is typeset as memos in that old-time Courier font. So it's just sort of, here's another one showing what the excerpt from the folio looks like. So it was just sort of fun to see Oursler at play here with the way he wanted to tell the story. It's true that the format does occasionally make for a little bit of awkward exposition, or it kind of throws background at you in a way that isn't particularly subtle or elegant. A lot of editors will tell writers today you don't want to front load your book with backstory. So the format does cause a few little quirks and oddities, but really not enough to interfere with my enjoyment of the book. Another thing that I like about this book, and Will Oursler's books in general, is that the author and his character are kind of Boy Scouts in a way. And by that I mean that they're just sort of very honest, salt of the earth, down to earth, good guys who have good moral fiber, who are maybe even a little naive in the way they go about life and taking part in these crimes. The main narrator in here is the junior partner in a law firm. And his name is Jim Matthews, and the senior partner is Phil Strong. And the aptly named Strong is the stronger of the two brains investigators. Jim here is more of a leg man, more of a scrounging around to get information that will help Phil Strong solve the crime. So in a way, you can almost think of the relationship between the two of them as like Hastings and Poirot, where, Hastings was a really good guy and you really liked him. You never thought that he was a genius like Poirot, but he was a very pleasant raconteur, a very pleasant narrator, and enjoyable to spend time with. And I feel that way about Jim Matthews here in Will Oursler's book. There's just something sort of sweet about the naivete and the real sense of, we believe that Florence White has been falsely accused, and we want to exonerate her because that is the right thing to do. And basically, that's the plot of the book. Florence is an office worker who is found guilty of stealing bonds from the office, worth a lot of money, and then is accused later, after her release, of murdering the two people who testified most strongly against her in her case, and therefore she has a revenge motive because she spent this time in prison that she didn't think she deserved, and the plot takes off from there. The lawyers who felt that Florence was honest the first time around also come to her defense when they feel she is being falsely accused of this murder. And that is pretty much the story. The tale unfolds as the two lawyers square off against a district attorney who's hell-bent on putting Florence back into prison, thinks that she's guilty as sin, and Jim and Phil are not going to let that happen if there's anything they have to say about it. The plot is okay. I mean, it's sort of like it's more the format that is interesting and different. The story itself doesn't feel that fresh or different, but it's definitely serviceable. And the different ways that that Oursler throws the narrative at you keeps you interested, even when you may be thinking, okay, this plot is, kind of typical of its era, and maybe not super exciting, but the book is fun to read and think about, and I really liked it for that reason. While we're talking about sort of the more critical aspects, or the more things about the book that I guess I would criticize a little more, is that Florence White herself is rather an enigma. She's very flat. She's for a person who's been accused of terrible crimes, there's really not much to her. She's not a femme fatale, or she's not a woman who's ahead of her time. She's just sort of a generic woman without much to her. And so I wish that I had known or learned more about Florence White. I think that could have made this book a little bit more rounded if we had seen more of who Florence was and what she did and didn't do and what her likes and dislikes were. She's really just a title character who the other characters revolve around but don't necessarily interact with much. But that's kind of a minor criticism. It certainly would not stop me from recommending the book. So I think that's all I really have to say about FOLIO on Florence White. It's an enjoyable read. Oh, there is one more thing I did want to say. I mentioned at the start of this video, is that the plot and the book really start almost on the day that the United States enters World War II. And there's some interesting things going on there where people are simultaneously shocked and horrified about the U.S. entry into World War II, but at the same time having to go about their daily lives, not being able to put everything on hold because all of a sudden the country was at war. And the war, even though it's brand new to the United States, does play a role in the plot. And some of the things that are happening in there, like, for example, plans for a new type of airplane are stolen. And the question is did some nefarious person, within the plot sell these plans to Germany or to one of the Axis members for personal profit? So that's fun, and it made me think too. How much the people who lived through the world wars, the greatest generations, how those wars just sort of touched every facet of their existence, right? In a lot of ways, not just in the United States, but especially in Europe. And now, wars are going on around us, right? Sadly, we have some really serious conflicts going on. And, for the most part, Americans, unless you're a news junkie, you don't hear a lot about them. They haven't caused the supply chain to dry up, or the United States hasn't been drawn into any of these conflicts, directly yet. Just sort of a different world than it was back then, which is one of the reasons why I love reading these older books, is to compare then and now. So if you can find a Will Oursler, give him a try. I actually think that if you're a parent and you have a kid, a teenager, who is starting to discover mysteries and is moving beyond, say, the Hardy Boys or Nancy Drew, and you want to recommend something that is more heading towards adult mystery fiction, I think you can recommend Will Oursler, heartily to your kids, because like I said, that Boy Scout approach, there's not a lot of cursing, certainly no sex. I got a kick out of a couple things that they talk about people having affairs, extramarital affairs, and he spells it AFFAIRE. I hadn't seen much of that before. And whenever he talks about the phone, he uses apostrophe phone. So that was kind of fun to see that kind of punctuation from back in the 40s that we would not see today. So that's all I've got for you tonight. I hope that if you pick up a Will Oursler and read it, you will enjoy it and maybe even share some thoughts about it in the comments below. So thank you, and I will be back next time with another forgotten mystery. Good night.